Oh, hello everyone. It's France Cecilia again from Enfield Voices and GlobalNet 21. And this is one of our regular webinars. And today we're going to discuss a very interesting situation where someone, and I'll introduce you in a minute, went through a desperate situation in terms of getting her fiancé across to the UK because the spouse visa laws were not working for her. It seemed very hostile. And we're going to talk to her about that. And it's Paige Ballmi, and she's already had articles in the press and Enfield Dispatch and so on. And she's kindly agreed to come along and talk to us. And we've got Hannah Dyson with us, who's going to join me in asking questions. Now, this is the first time Hannah's done it, so it's great to have you here today. It's a tragic story because 2 years ago in December 2017, I gather you stood on a bridge above a road in North London and thinking that you might jump. Now that was a terrible, desperate situation to be in. Do you want to tell us what led you to do that?
So I met my fiancé in 2016. Well, he's now my husband. And we didn't realise that actually wanting to be together would be such a difficult journey. There was lots of hoops to jump through, so we jumped through them. We applied for him to stay with me in the UK, and it was refused on incorrect grounds. And 2 days later, that's when I found myself on the bridge above a motorway. And I was quite, I thought you could just pick up the phone and be like, oh, hi, Home Office, you've made a mistake. Please, can you rectify this? Just after 2 days, I realised that was not going to happen. And a year later, I realised it was never going to happen. So yeah, that's how I ended up there. We were refused on the basis that I didn't meet the minimum income requirement of 18,600. Which is what a British citizen has to earn in order to bring a spouse from outside of the EU.
Okay, well, let's go through that story step by step. Hannah, you take it from here.
Hi, Paige. When did you meet your husband, and how did you meet initially?
We met in the Fox pub in Palmer's Green, which is now, I hear, no longer. I don't know, it was all boarded up last time I went there. And I was out for a friend's birthday, he was out for his cousin's birthday. We exchanged numbers, we met up a few times, and I think maybe 4 months on we realised that we wanted to stay together, and it was just a normal blossoming relationship that most people have. And yeah.
How long had you been together when you made that application to the Home Office?
Oh, about almost 2 years. Almost 2 years.
So you've been together that time, and they told you, I gather, that you hadn't met the income threshold of £18,600, which you did. So, I mean, they obviously made a mistake or they were being deceptive. I mean, what did you do? How did you follow that up?
So my first initial thing to do was just to call my solicitor and say, what is going on here? She was surprised. I then followed it up with the local MP, who made a lot of representations for me and pressed them to say, this is wrong, I've seen the evidence, but they just totally shut off every kind of communication that we had with them. I made complaints, they wouldn't talk to me because I wasn't the applicant. My husband made complaints, they wouldn't talk to him because he was out of the UK. So they, like I said, they shut off every avenue we had. And in the meantime to this, we had already appealed the decision. We had the right of appeal, but an appeal could take anything to 12 to 18 months. So there was that time of uncertainty that we just didn't know what was going to happen. A part of the appeal, they have to do an appeal review, so they have to review the decision, which they did, and they still refused it because we were quite hopeful that once they look at it again, they will realise there's a mistake. But again, that didn't happen. So they sent us to court, and well, we sent them to court because we appealed. And when we turned up, the Home Office didn't turn up. They didn't submit any paperwork, so they couldn't even be bothered to turn up and justify why they'd kept us apart. And a lot of people would think, you know, oh, these decisions, there must have been something wrong. And the naivety of myself, I look at other people's decisions and think, oh, maybe there's a reason for that. But knowing what I know now, there doesn't have to be a reason. Not all the time, anyway.
Okay, Hannah.
Do you think the Home Office refused your application page as a kind of tactical way of putting you off, making it very hard for you, even though obviously it's part of the regulations? Obviously that's why you applied, because you'd read them and you thought, you know, your application would be successful.
Yeah, I mean, I would never have applied knowing that we didn't submit a full application. We had a solicitor checking over it who was a good solicitor. It wasn't as if they were like a, you know, you do get sham solicitors, but that's what happens. There's a lot of reasons why I think that I can never prove. One of them being my husband's nationality. He's from Albania. They have a really high refusal rate when it comes to visas because they do have a bad reputation in the UK, but as does every nationality. The other thing I thought was maybe they thought that we would apply again, knowing that if they refused us on such a small thing, knowing that we had all the paperwork, that we would apply again as opposed to appealing, because appealing takes too long and applying again would mean that it generates another income for them and it's quicker for us to get another decision. But I had no faith that they would make a decision right when they couldn't even do it the first time. So there are many other reasons, but I can't pinpoint which one it is.
But they actually had a payslip, didn't they, that they lost, and that was pretty crucial in that decision they made.
Yeah, so I had to submit 12 months worth of payslips, which I did. And I also, alongside that, submitted my bank statements to show that the payments were in my bank. And the funny thing of all of this is they actually have access to HMRC records. So they could have just checked themselves, but they didn't. And yeah, so when I added it up, they said that I'd earned like 18,400. I thought, how did they get to that amount? So I added it up a million times, maybe even a trillion times. And there was one payslip where I would have got, that would have been taken away from that, would have made that amount of money. So it was obvious that that payslip was missing. Had they lost it, fine. We provided it again 4 times after the refusal to, you know, the MP provided it, we provided it, solicitor provided it, and they still failed to acknowledge that it was there. And they also failed to say that it was, they just think it was never given to them. They won't admit that they lost it, but I can't prove that they lost it. It's just one of those things. They've kind of shut everything off to make sure that we couldn't prove them wrong.
Yeah, Hannah?
Would you say you feel discriminated against, I guess, because your husband is Albanian? Do you think that nationality in particular caused a problem in your application?
I think it caused a little bit of a problem, yeah. In terms of myself being discriminated against, what I find is that the Home Office don't like, this is just my opinion, it seems that they don't really appreciate that people travel, people fall in love, people come to university in England, people go to universities elsewhere, they meet other people from other cultures and they fall in love and they want to start a family and they get married. And a lot of people live outside of the UK and a lot of people live in the UK. But when it comes to living in the UK, that's when it gets tricky for them. They're like, no, you can't do that here. And it's like, well, this is my home. Why can't I do it? I was quite naive at the beginning to think, you know, I'm a British citizen. I've got rights to a family life. I now laugh hysterically at that because it's not true at all. And I feel that the financial discrimination against it as well. So I wasn't allowed to bring my husband here unless I earned that amount of money. Yet someone here who's in a really high paid job can. So what makes them different from me? Just because our bank balance is different, it's not, it doesn't feel fair that, you know, politicians like Jeremy Hunt can bring his wife, and he doesn't even know where she's from. He got it wrong a few times, and yet if they was in an interview for the genuine subsisting relationship, that would have been a factor that they would have refused on. So it's all these things play into a part of it, but I think a big part of it is the financial discrimination.
Okay, Hannah?
It's almost a breach of your human right, really, right to a family life that was being breached, or is being breached by them, by the Home Office, making it so difficult for you to do a simple application. And obviously you're working. Is your husband working, and how many hours does he work?
At the moment, I hardly see him. He works a lot because now we're in a lot of debt. We paid about £10,000 to the Home Office, and that was just for the first visa. And we've got a couple more to go before we get to the end of it. And so he leaves home about 7 in the morning, and then I don't see him possibly till 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock some nights. He's a self-employed builder. And he works really hard, and he's always worked hard, because in Albania it's quite a country that's rife with poverty, and all those people have ever known is to work. So that's all they're grafters, that's all they've ever done.
Because I wondered, is there an NHS implication? Do you have to, has your husband had to pay any fees to use the NHS, even though you're both working very hard?
Yeah, so for his initial visa to come to the UK, he would have had to have paid an NHS surcharge, which was £500 at the time we applied. It's now increased to £1,000, which is payable at every stage of renewal of the visa. And apparently that £1,000 is kind of like a bit of an insurance. So it's like your first boost of tax paying, if that makes sense. But for the first visa, I think it's absolutely fine to pay that, because obviously you're coming, you're contributing. But then after that, if you're working and paying tax, you're essentially being double taxed, which is quite difficult when you're having to be, and we don't know really if that money is going to the NHS. I've never begrudged any money going to the NHS. They do a fabulous job. But I'd like to know why the NHS is still struggling. I think there was a vague figure that they'd made like £6 million out of this, and I know that's not a lot of money, but it is a lot of money. It could have helped. It could have helped.
For you personally, it must have been incredibly stressful. I gather you actually were hospitalized because of it. I mean, what happened?
So I found myself on the bridge, and I don't really remember much. It's all kind of a blur now, but there was police, and they took me to hospital, and they sectioned me under 136 of the Mental Health Act. And I was in hospital for 24 hours. Had like an assessment to make sure that I wasn't going to do it again when I was going to leave, and stuff like that, and explain to them my situation. And even the GPs and doctors there were just like, what? They'd never heard of anything like it before. And it led me to have counselling. I was under the IAP service, and I was on antidepressants. I still am on antidepressants because I've got a lingering, not diagnosed yet, but symptoms of PTSD because of this situation. So when I think about all the families that are involved in this, and I know how I felt, I just can't imagine how a child must feel to think that they can't have their mum or dad here because the government says you don't earn enough.
Yeah, I mean, you must have felt desperately alone and helpless. But in a way, what helped you then was you came across Reunited Tammy UK and you talked to them, and that led you to take the action that you did. Do you want to tell us about that part of the story as well?
Yeah, so from my desperate pleas, I came across a Facebook group called Reunited Family UK. It was set up in 2017. Just as a support group to support people, because it is a really difficult time to be separated from your family. And I started to find more people, like-minded people who had been through the situation, who were going through the situation, or who were just about to start their journey with applying, and we all offered support. And JCWI, a charity for immigrants, they supported us a lot, and they brought us together to campaign against the minimum income requirement, to campaign to show the mental health aspects of what these rules are causing, and it's become like a family. They really helped me, and if I didn't find this group, I don't know, I'd be really bored actually. I got quite involved pretty early on because it was just someone to talk to. I had no one to talk to. My husband was a million miles away, and I couldn't. I could only speak to him by phone. Some of these people in the group were quite local. Some of them weren't, but they were based in London. But they're quite all over the place, from Bristol to Devon to Newcastle. So we're now a group of people. I think there's about 1,600 of us now, all campaigning against the rules, and we've all been affected. And we've had quite a lot of support as well from a lot of MPs. The SNP have been great. Kate Osamore for Edmonton has been fantastic as well. And yeah, working with media, campaigning technique, and a lot of our group actually has a lot of talent. A lot of people think these people just go on holiday and meet someone and then try to bring them back. It's not like that at all. These people are you know, there's graphic designers, there's architects, there's musicians, you know, there's a wealth of talent in there that we've been able to use to help us campaign against these rules. So it's been great to, you know, get them all together and have that platform.
Okay, Hannah?
Yes, yeah, I know you're trying to change the actual non-EU visa spouse laws, but also is quite difficult for you because what's going on in the actual Home Office, so the people actually working there, I don't know if they've got targets or they've got kind of a way of working. How can you infiltrate the people working in the Home Office to make them work in a different way so they're actually adhering to the laws?
That's where it becomes difficult because, you know, as you know, I couldn't even communicate with them for about a year. I think our main plight is to gather as much evidence as we can. You know, we've got Bristol University who are quite happy to help us get the stats together, because there's a lot of stats about the separation that military has on families, lots of information about children separated from parents through social services, but there's nothing about how the immigration rules affect families. So that's something that we do want to work. If we've got a nice big chunk of evidence, we can't say for definite that the Home Office will say, oh yeah, you're right, because even the Child Commissioner's report that was done in 2015 states that 15,000 children were separated from their families. And the Home Office really try and dial that down and say, oh, it's more like 6,000. But even if it is 6,000, it's still one child too many. So it's building the evidence, building the case studies, real people with real lived experiences. They probably can tell us no, but we'll do our best to keep campaigning until they give up, basically.
Because I think many women obviously work part-time, so they will be earning around £18,600. I think 40% of part-time workers who are women will earn less than that, so it does have a lot of impact, these laws, on women and obviously the children, and it's a vicious circle that I've been reading.
It's a vicious circle. I mean, women in part-time work, they're having to work, juggle childcare as well, and as well as trying to meet an income requirement, which if they were allowed their partner here, you know, they would be able to help with childcare, and then they could work full-time. Many mothers do work full-time and are able to do so. And it is, I think women is a big, especially with things like the gender pay gap and stuff like that. I won't go too much into that, but there is factors that, you know, that do come into play when women are now being pushed into public funds where they have to rely on the state. Whereas if you just let their husband come home, they wouldn't have to access those public funds. And I think one of the big things of the minimum income requirement is that it's to stop migrants from accessing public funds. But they don't have access to public funds, regardless of what you earn. And that was the policy pre-2012. Pre-2012 was that if you could just show enough money to support yourself, I don't think there was any minimum or maximum, but just show how you was going to support yourself from this job, that job, or from this, whatever, from family and friends. And that's what we want to go back to. It's not that we want new laws. We want to go back to what was there before because it worked. It didn't discriminate against families and it didn't see lots of children separated from their parents. So it just makes a lot of sense to go back to that. I mean, like this week, they've gone back to the student visas being allowed to stay for 2 years after their course is finished. You know, that's not a new law. That's what was in before 2012. And when we look at who was Home Secretary back in 2012, this is Theresa May's legacy. This is what she created. Her hostile environment for illegal immigrants has actually forced more people to become undocumented and to become a part of the wrong people that she needed to target.
But your experience is the opposite to what lots of people think, don't they? They think, oh, migrants come into the country, they're going to scrounge money. But the opposite is true. They're not scrounging money, they're earning their way, but they can't get the public funds they need to help them fight their case.
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to challenging wrong decisions in court, legal aid is just not available for that. It's all paid for by the applicant or by, you know, whoever they can get money from. For us, you know, I don't know how we paid it, but we just managed to find money from somewhere. But I don't know when it comes to the Home Office taking people to court about how that's obviously, I don't know the laws around it, that's obviously taxpayers' money. So, and even when they, like, you know, they remove people from the country, they deport people, they detain people, that all comes at a cost of the taxpayer. So, you know, by telling us, oh, your husband or your wife is not allowed to come here in case they claim benefits, which they have no interest, a majority have no interest in doing. I've never met a migrant that thinks, oh, let's go and get universal credit, you know, for a £12 payment that you won't get until after 6 to 8 weeks. You know, it doesn't make sense. It's not universal credit, and the benefits in this country are not something to be falling head over heels for. You know, the people that are accessing them and are using them are struggling as it is. So why would they come to use those benefits to make themselves poorer when they can go to work? And a lot of them are talented. You know, one of our members has married a teacher from Ethiopia. He teaches English. He can come here, he can teach English. My husband, he's a carpenter. He can build things. You know, he's built up half of London already. There's a lot of talent out there that people are bringing to the UK. But they don't look at that. They just look at, if we put this amount of money, it will stop them accessing benefits that they can't get.
Okay, Hannah?
And going forward, do you feel a little bit in limbo at the moment? Because would you like to go to university or start a family, or with your future plans, are you putting that on hold because of what has happened to you already with your application?
Yeah, I think because we have a couple more applications to make, because they're only 2.5 years every, so there's a 5-year route and a 10-year route. We're on the 5-year route, luckily, but we still have 2 applications to make before he is allowed to stay here forever. There is the possibility that he could get refused at any stage of those renewals. There is the possibility that we won't meet the requirements at any stage of those renewals, because it's hanging over our heads. I can't guarantee that I'm not going to lose a job. I can't guarantee that I'm going to be made redundant or my company gets shut down or whatever. You know, and going to uni, I feel like I can't do it because I'm worried that even if my husband, he's self-employed, even he won't make the minimum income requirement within the 6 months before we apply. Or, you know, there's all these things hanging over our head, and even taking time out to start a family, having a child, it's just not an option, through fear, maybe my own fear, that if he gets taken away again, I won't cope with it at all, because there is a possibility, a very small possibility, that will happen. And I think with the B word, I won't mention it, but that we are going to see many more families being pushed into that, and European families, you know, these rules will possibly be applied to them. And when we wanted equality with EU citizens, that's not what we wanted. So we're going to see a lot more of this, I think, in the future, with wages dropping, you know, whatever happens, and how that's going to affect people. People will fall out of those requirements and might not be able to keep their family together like they thought they would.
Actually, yeah, this is going to affect a lot more families after Brexit, because it won't just affect the non-EU spouse visas, but it will affect all the Europeans in Britain. So this is going to have a much bigger remit in the future, which is quite scary. Does that worry you at all?
That does worry me, because I wouldn't wish it on anyone. I really wouldn't wish it on anyone. It is not a nice thing to be separated, to be told that you're not rich enough to have a family in the UK, to be told as a British citizen that I'm no longer welcome here because I've married someone else, you know. I think maybe when that happens, if that happens, because there's nothing really in writing, but I know the government inside out now. They think about things economically rather than morally, and I think that if a minimum income requirement is imposed on British citizens, spouses of EU citizens, then I think on a wider scale it might get more outrage, because it's no secret that non-EU migrants have always been scapegoats for the government, and now I just don't think that was enough for them, and now they've brought EU citizens into that, and it's not fair to try and use any migrant, EU, non-EU, as a scapegoat at all, to push these things, you know. So I think when it comes to European families having to go through the same thing, I think that's when the issue will be on a broader scale, and people will start to realise how wrong it is.
Okay, well, we're getting pretty close to the end of this webinar now. So let me ask you, I mean, if anybody else finds themselves in this tragic situation that you did, what advice would you give them?
Don't give up, because that's what they want. I think it probably would have been a bit easier for the Home Office if I'd succeeded, because now I think I'm known on a first name basis now. So, but they want you to give up. I think being as hostile as they can will push people away, because they don't want people here, even British citizens who do decide to marry outside of the EU. So when it comes to just be a nuisance, don't give up. They will put barriers at every point. Break them down. Join our group. We're all here to help. We're a nice bunch. We're a nice big family now. So, but you're not alone. That's the one thing I will say, because at the time I didn't have the group. I didn't have anyone who really understood and knew the rules, because it was even baffling to me. It still baffles me now. But yeah, so just you're not alone. Don't give up, and we're all here to support.
Okay, and Hannah, one final point.
Yeah, when I was doing my research for this webinar, I came across another group called the Joint Council for the Welfare of Immigrants. Have you used them at all and given them a call or emailed them?
Yeah, so they have a Families Together campaigner called Mary Atkinson, and she supports us a lot, and they were the kind of people that encouraged the group to start. They'd been in contact with our co-founders, Jane and Caroline, and encouraged them to start a group, make a safe space for people, and they've been supporting us ever since. And they have a tool that you can use to write to your MP about the minimum income requirement, to scrap it, so that's a start to use. It's quite easy. All you've got to do is just put your postcode in, and the email is generated, send.
Yeah.
Okay, so, you know, if anybody wanted to help or they were in difficulty, who would they get in touch with? How would they do it?
You can find me. I'm always available. I mean, everyone sort of knows my name now, so just search my name. I'm always available. Message me. I'll always get it, or join the group. Or if, you know, just that's the only advice I can give, is just join the group or find me, and we can go from there.
Okay, well, thanks very much for doing this. I think people don't understand the scale of the problem. I gather there's something like 15,000 children affected by this. So it's a huge problem, and you've done a great deal to let people know about it. Anyhow, thank you for taking part, and thank you, Hannah, for joining us and asking questions on that. That's really great. I think people have learned a lot on this, and I'm sure we'll get some comments. And if we get any offers of help, or anyone who wants to know anything, we'll pass them on to you, Paige. So, thank you very much for joining us. And it's been a very intriguing and revealing webinar. Thank you. We'll end this webinar now.